Morning and good morning to you. It's Monday, so time to chat geopolitics. Geoffrey Miller is an international analyst, goodness me, with the Democracy Project. Morning and good morning to you, Geoffrey. How are you doing?
Good morning, Rachel. I'm well.
Hopefully getting your words out a little better than me this morning. Russia's announcement, let's talk about that because it will station tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus, it says. Why is Putin doing this, do you think?
This is hugely significant, really. Belarus has not had nuclear weapons stationed on its territory since the 1990s. And while Putin has hinted at this possibility before, the fact he's following through with it, I think is significant. And I think it's, again, Putin being asymmetric. You saw that arrest warrant issued by the International Criminal Court a couple of weeks ago. And I think, in a way, this is his response to that and to raise the stakes, to escalate. And by putting nuclear weapons into Belarus, this is just another way of escalating in an asymmetric way rather than on the battlefield as such. And in Bakhmut and all of these places that we've been hearing about, he goes for the literal nuclear option. So we're expecting a storage facility to be ready, according to what Putin has told us, by July the 1st in Belarus, and nuclear weapons you would think would be stationed there at any time thereafter. They're called tactical nuclear weapons, and I think that's something of a misnomer. They can be, the yield of these tactical nuclear weapons can be many times even what you saw what was dropped on Hiroshima in 1945. So these are not small weapons. They might be used for gains on the battlefield rather than destroying distant cities, but their devastating impact can be just the same. And the international campaign for to abolish nuclear weapons, has warned of this escalation and of the catastrophic humanitarian consequences that could result from the use of these weapons. So it's not good news. It is escalation, and I think this is one main reason why this war cannot be won really by either side, is because of the presence of nuclear weapons in the calculations, and the fact that Putin is probably crazy enough to use a nuclear weapon.
Oh gosh, what's the international reaction been? And I guess, what are the consequences, do you think, does this have essentially for the war in general?
If you look at the Ukrainian side, they're saying that he's taking a nuclear hostage with Belarus. And I mean, there's a lot of truth to that. And Belarus is effectively having to do whatever Putin wants because their dictator, Alexander Lukashenko, is being propped up. And his regime has been propped up by Putin since protests there in 2020 threatened the stability of the Belarusian regime. And but if you look at the US, they're playing it cool so far. Joe Biden hasn't seemed to really comment on this so far publicly. We've just had spokespeople saying, we haven't seen any indications that Russia is planning to use a nuclear weapon. I guess the West, their hands are tied to some extent with this. They don't want to buy into Putin's game here. And by accepting the threat, that sort of increases the power of what Putin is saying here. So I don't know. Behind the scenes, probably quite a lot is going on, and I think we're probably going to be digesting and hearing more about these tactical nukes in the months to come.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, let's talk about Nanaia Mahuta's visit to China. How successful do you think was it? Was it successful?
I think it was overall. She got not just one but two meetings. So she had one meeting with Qin Gang, who is her direct counterpart, the Chinese foreign minister now, but also she had a meeting with Wang Yi. Now, he used to be the foreign minister, but now has a director role, he's director of foreign affairs in the Politburo, and so he's more senior to Qin. And I think the fact that she got these two meetings was significant. And if you look at the Chinese account of the meeting, it was very positive, talked about resumption of high-level engagement and really gave a lot of compliments to New Zealand and was indicating how important the relationship was for China. If you look at Mahuta's own statement, it was also positive, but mentioned, the familiar issues of Xinjiang, Hong Kong, the issues in the Taiwan Strait now and the South China Sea, and also mentioned about New Zealand's concerns about China potentially supplying weapons to Russia. So there were about 4 different points of tension that were clearly raised in the meeting. But, it did include, the resumption of high-level dialogues, both if you look at both the Chinese and the New Zealand account of the meetings that focused on this, saying that, there are going to be more high-level meetings in the future. And really that's what this meeting, or these meetings by Mahuta and China were all about, were about securing future meetings and going right to the top. So there was a mention in the New Zealand statement about a potential visit by Chris Hipkins to China later this year. It's still in the works. It hasn't been announced. We don't have any concrete details, but it's clearly still being talked about. And, we wait with interest to see when and if this actually eventuates.
I would think it would, and I would think, because it's important that, our Prime Minister meets with the Chinese senior leaders, but I suspect it might happen closer to the election. It's very statesmanlike, I would have thought, to put Chris Hipkins alongside, the senior government officials in China, I would think.
It's fascinating, Rach. If you go back to the end of last year, Jacinda Ardern was saying she wanted to visit China earlier in the new year. And when Chris Hipkins came took over from Ardern in January, he basically said it would be a high priority to follow through with that visit, even though there's a new Prime Minister. But everything went quiet after that. And if you look at what Hipkins said at his post-cabinet press conference last week, he seemed to be playing down expectations, saying, there are a lot of moving parts and it hadn't been taken off the table. You wonder whether the slowdowns come from the New Zealand side or from the Chinese side. You wonder whether decisions that New Zealand has made, for example, the TikTok restrictions a couple of weeks ago, if they're playing into this, whether the Chinese have got cold feet. If you look at, though, these meetings that Mahuta had with her Chinese counterparts, they're quite warm. So I don't know exactly what's going on behind the scenes. It would be fascinating to know whether the delays coming from the New Zealand side or from the Chinese side, and maybe that's why it's not happening in this first quarter of the year. Maybe it won't happen, at all. Maybe it won't happen, as you say, until much closer to the election. Who knows?
Who knows? Interesting times, so all the diplomacy and what's going on behind the scenes in the China-New Zealand relationship. It is 20 to 6.